Blasphemous 2 is the latest game I fully dived into, and it's one of the first Metroidvania games I've played in a while. And I realized I don't play a lot of Metroidvania games despite loving every single one that I have played. And with me saying that, you can guess, I loved Blasphemous 2. I never played the first game, but I have seen some footage of it, and I will say it looks pretty great as well. But a lot of people asked me about Blasphemous 2 and asked if I was going to play this or Armored Core 6, as they both came out on the same day, and I really had interest in both of them. And I decided to play Blasphemous, and I'm glad I did. But before we fully dive into a quick review and what I think of the game, I'm going to say this video will have some spoilers. If you haven't fully beat the game yet, you might like see a boss or something, nothing too crazy. Just my thoughts on the game. Really, this should be a fun one. And before we start, make sure you like and subscribe as it helps out the channel a lot, and let's get in. Like I said, I haven't played the first one, so I didn't really know much of the story, but you play as the Penitent who awakes in a strange new land, and the heart of the sky foretells a new miracle child being born, or something like that. The game takes place after the original game's Eventide DLC. Really, I'm not 100% sure, so I'm sorry if I get any of this wrong. And going in, I'll be honest, I didn't care too much for the story, and was more intrigued by the non-linear pathing, great platforming, and what looked like hard bosses, but also great progression. And what I found was something I didn't expect. Like all Metroidvanias, this game starts off with really no weapons or power-ups. It has you pick your starting weapon, and at first I thought this was going to be the only weapon I had for the entire game, but I later learned you eventually get to carry all of the weapons and need all of them for so many different puzzles and so much progression. But I like that you get to choose which starting weapon you want, as it shows how much progression is available early on with really every single weapon, and it's just incredible. Now, I chose the Sarmiento and Centella swords for my first weapon, and it's kind of funny because by the end of the game, they were probably my least used weapons compared to the big heavy hitter of Veredicto or the balanced sword of Ruego al Obal, which I also said that wrong. But what fascinates me is really how balanced all three of these weapons feel. They all have their own upgrade tree with somewhat similar upgrades that you can get with Marks of Martyrdom, which you find from treasures, get from NPCs, or get after killing a certain amount of enemies. And each weapon I found was better against certain enemies, which we'll get into later in a bit. But I found myself switching between weapons quite often, depending on which foe I was fighting, and really what puzzle I was doing. And it really helped keep the game feeling really fresh throughout the entire playthrough, just switching weapons all the time. I want to talk about something that's somewhat similar to weapons, and it's really all the amazing character upgrades that you get, and how natural it felt getting them. Throughout the game, you run into multiple NPCs that all have different items that they request, and you have all these different fetch quests that you can do that upgrades health, fervor, which is basically your magic meter, gives you spells for your magic meter, gives you those wooden carvings that'll give you small buffs. There's upgrades everywhere. Let's talk about all the items in the game and how great all of them are and how unique all of them are, really, with how many different playstyles you can have. First, we have the rosary beads. There's 27 different rosary beads, and you're able to hold 5 at a time with all the upgrades. And the rosary beads give you all these different types of buffs to physical and like elemental damage, all the magic damage that they have, like lightning, fire, Miyamasa. It's probably saying that wrong as well. You can also get more tiers of atonement gained, really all that type of stuff. The rosary beads feel more like a defensive upgrade compared to offense. Then next we have the prayers, which are basically the magic items that use your fervor meter, and I feel you just find these throughout the map or doing small side quests for NPCs. You can have 2 different equipped at a time, and there's 2 different categories. Really, I wasn't utilizing these magic items for the first like 45% of my game, and the game got so much easier once I actually started utilizing them. It slipped through my brain on how to actually do them. But all the different magic items, they're very, very strong, and they feel all pretty good. Some of them are definitely better than others, but if they're stronger, they'll use more fervor, of course. And then lastly, we have the wooden carvings, or what they're officially called is the altar pieces of favors, which were probably the hardest things to keep up with in my opinion. You can hold up to 8 of these at a time if you have it fully upgraded, but it costs a lot of martyrdom to fully upgrade this. These give you more general buffs compared to the defensive resistances like the rosary beads, and there's a lot of them in the game, and hell, some of them have some good secrets behind them, like achievements or even a secret ending in the game. I personally wasn't using these too often in the game, as you had to go all the way back to the main town if you wanted to change them, unless you get like an upgrade from another NPC doing side quests, which I wasn't able to get, which was like finding like 9 sisters total, and they allow you to upgrade it and you can switch those carvings out anytime you want. But the carvings are nice buffs that increase your damage, fire damage, all those types of different damages, or really just random things, but not really defensive stuff like the rosary beads. Those are just all the items and upgrades your character gets in this game from all the different NPCs. And I'll tell you, there's way too many NPCs for me to cover all of them, as that will just spoil everything the game has to offer, as it's really fun to find all the little secrets in the game has. But I made sure to get everything done, and by the time I was finished with both endings, I was about 94% done with the full game. It's filled to the brim with secrets and very fun unlockables, but the most tedious one may be finding the 33 brothers of Proximos scattered across the map. This map is huge, and these 33 babies, they are everywhere. Like, you'll find some of them, but you won't have the right upgrades to actually get them, so you need to come back for it. And personally, that's where I messed up, because I didn't place a marker on all of them, so I had to go back, retrace so many steps just to get them all and get all those items. But I will say, getting the 33 Proximo brothers, the items you get for that, totally worth it. With that said, I would highly suggest using your markers when you find an item that you can't get, just so you don't forget about it. You may forget what's there from the marker, but if you just go to the marker, you'll see that it's an item. It's like, oh, thanks, past me, for helping me out. But really, overall, just the progression of this game feels really good, and it just flows so nicely. I really could not put this game down. The way it pieces itself and scatters items everywhere, and you're just constantly teleporting yourself or backtracking, and it's not even a bad thing that you're backtracking. It still feels like you're progressing the story, getting these items, because these items give you so much buffs that will help you so much later down the line. Really, it's just a magical game. I remember when I got the final ability, like the upgrade that your character gets, I spent like an hour backtracking through every single labyrinth, just trying to get all the items possible. Now, if we shift our focus from the items and the upgrades, we can talk about something that was kind of a constant struggle for me in the game, and it was the enemy. I love the way this game works, where if you die, you don't lose all of your Tears of Atonement like you would in like a Dark Souls game, but you just lose part of your fervor meter until you pick up your corpse. And even then, you still might lose a part of it if you've died multiple times in a row. The enemies in this game get so much harder the deeper you go, that when eventually you go back to the beginning areas because you're just walking through, those enemies are a piece of cake. But throughout the whole game, I had a few enemies in mind that when I saw them, I was like, oh no, I do not want to deal with you. Because these enemies are just so sneaky. Some of them are so tanky and just have so much health, and they do so much damage, you might just die in a few hits. Granted, I wasn't utilizing my upgrades for 50% of the game, so I was still dying a lot when I shouldn't have been. But still, some enemies did so much damage, and it was like a Souls-like game. We have to learn their movements and know when to dodge, or you'll be in for a lot of pain. But other than that aspect of learning enemy movement, I don't really view this as a Souls-like game, nor do I really care. I just think it's a great Metroidvania. But the biggest thing going into this game for me was the bosses. I was told by a lot of people that Blasphemous is a hard game, and I will agree, it has some pretty hard parts to it, but I didn't find the bosses to be that hard, minus the first boss that I faced that had 3 phases and had to fight 2 enemies at once. That was a little hard with how little upgrades that I had, but every boss, minus the second to last boss, wasn't really too much of a challenge. I die a couple times here and there, then I adapt to their moves pretty fast, and having easier bosses than I expected isn't a bad thing. I was just surprised. I thought they'd be harder with how hard people said this game was, but they were still a lot of fun to fight. And maybe this game would be harder for someone else. I like to think I'm decent at platformers and decent at Metroidvanias. Not the greatest at Souls-like games, but like I said, it's not much of a Souls-like game. I felt like the bosses were easy for my liking, but maybe for someone that's less experienced in platforming and kind of fast movement, the movement in this game feels really good for the bosses, the dash, the double jump, all of that. Maybe someone else would find it a little bit harder, but there's about 10 bosses in the game total, and they gradually get a little bit harder, but it's nothing like crazy. Minus the second to last one, that one's pretty hard. But other than that, bosses were easier than I thought. Enemies were harder at times because you have to fight so many of them at times, and sometimes you get stuck in a wall with like 4 enemies attacking you and then you just die. But overall, boss is easy, great game. And what more else is there to say, really? I loved Blasphemous 2, and I'm very happy with my pickup. I will say that. I would recommend this game to anyone. The pacing of the game, the amount of upgrades and abilities, the incredible amount of secrets to do if you want to. It's all really so much fun. Some people may struggle with this game if they're not used to platformers or the Souls-like-esque combat against a lot of the enemies, but I feel anyone can adapt to it fast and end up victorious. The hardest fight is by far the second to last boss, and if you get that far into the game, you'll know the mechanics pretty well and you'll adapt easily to win. Really, I love this game, and it's another contender for best indie game of the year next to Dave the Diver. That's another great game, but this game, I loved it. I may not have played the first one, but you don't really need to play the first one to fully understand what's going on in the second game. That knowledge is not really needed. It may help you for sure, but overall, it's still a good time. And you may get grossed out here or there by some of the things in this game. Some of the graphics and the visuals, I guess, they're kind of gross. There's a lot of love in this series, and I'm very happy that I picked it up. Let me know in the comments if you plan on playing this game or already played it, and let me know what you think of this more in-depth review for a game fully beat instead of, you know, a few hours in. Love to hear your thoughts on it. An extra special shout out to the people that support me on Patreon still. Really, I can't thank you enough, so just thank you for that support. And if you want to watch me live on Twitch, you can come hang out on twitch.tv/Burr 5 to 6 days a week. We start at about 1 p.m. Eastern time. And yeah, that's all. See you next time.